Die Diaspora spricht.
Parlando.
Diaspora.
Diasporas parle.
Diaspora spreekt.
Diasporas speaking.
Presentation. My name is Rina Limoni and I am the host of Diasporas Speaking. In the coming months, together with our guests, we will explore the journeys, personal histories, activism, and academic developments concerning Kosovo, Albanian, and Balkan diasporas to attain a deeper understanding of our communities scattered around the globe. This episode highlights why I have started this podcast, how the idea came about. Additionally, also tell you a bit about my diaspora story and background, and most importantly, what to expect in the coming months. So, first things first, I was born in Gjilan, Kosovo, and lived there for the first years of my life. Then, for obvious reasons and the growing human rights abuses in Kosovo during the 1990s, and my parents' political activism, particularly my dad's, we had to abruptly leave for Germany. I remember preparing for school at the end of August, and then we were gone in September. In Germany, we first arrived in Landsberg am Lech, and within our first 2 years we had moved 4 times, transferred from one camp to another. Living and growing up in Germany in the mid-1990s and 2000s involved being torn by events in Kosovo, even at a time without internet, whether it was through popular culture or the news, political activism or history. My parents aimed to maintain a close connection with Kosovo, involving us children as much as possible. And this is something that contributed to how I viewed myself and identity in Germany. And because also living in Germany entailed being constantly reminded that one is not from there. Even though I was just a child when we moved, I remember after 3 weeks journey with my family, when we arrived, because we had to leave so much behind, my parents, both my older sister and I, new shoes or jackets, so my teachers would comment and magnify on how we could afford this as refugees. Or my teacher, after 2 months of school, making us write tests in German and not considering that we were not understanding the language and then failing us. So these are some of the many examples on how I came to understand my identity as Kosovo Albanian and not German, because we continuously were reproduced as others, foreigners, or the German word Ausländer. But this othering practices led to me believing that Kosovo was my only home. However, my first discursive shuplak, to use the Albanian term for slap, came up on arriving in Kosovo on the first visit in 2000, right after the war. I understood I was not from there anymore, not only because of the time I had missed, but also how those of us who had migrated during the 1990s and before were viewed as ktatjashtit, those outsiders. This confused and irritated me because up until that point I did not perceive myself as an other in Kosovo or an outsider. And even though the then inheriting structures in 2000 didn't have any material impact on our lives, or to say institutional power, upon arriving in Kosovo, the notion that we were ktatjashtit made me think, because suddenly I didn't belong there either. Something one doesn't understand as an early teen, but something that has shaped my thinking about migration and diasporas. Even more so when I arrived in the UK and met fellow Albanian communities here, and I recognized there was a misconception about the Kosovo Albanian diaspora in Germany and how it was viewed. Unfortunately, that the Kosovo Albanian diaspora in Germany were backward monkeys with tails appeared to be a popular conception. I felt the need to defend and say, well, that's not true, because a group definition was attributed and enforced upon the Kosovo Albanian diaspora in Germany. So I've lived in Germany up until university and then moved to the UK. Migrating twice meant creating more than one home. But it also meant, given that I decided to stay in the UK after graduating, that the idea of home became more precarious. And it placed me within a third or fourth space where I was challenged and learned to view my positionality critically and how I conceptualize my identity and the self. And this was beyond preconditioned notions of the state, because thinking of it, I am neither true Gilanjike or Augsburgerin or Londoner. This inevitably contributes to a constant feeling of non-belonging, meaning having an outsider status even within the country designated diasporas. I remember visiting my parents a few years ago, and then a cousin of mine telling me, well, now you're no longer one of us Schatzes because you've moved to the UK. Things that make me think, and as one thing leads to another, I became very curious to read about ethnicity, nation, migration, identity, and diaspora, whether at uni or privately. During my studies, I discovered Out of Place by Said and diaspora literature within geopolitics and post-colonial approaches, and found an academic home in political geography, critical geopolitics, learning also from decolonial feminist writings of Gloria Anzaldúa and others, particularly the concept of border thinking and world making otherwise, where learning and telling history is otherwise central. So, to not prolong on this any further, these experiences have shaped my understanding of the diaspora and with time encouraged this podcast.
It's hard to explain what it means to be a person living in the diaspora. It's hard to be able to express the internal conflicts in words and all the emotions that arise from them. But to be a person of the diaspora, for me, means constantly searching for a sense of belonging. It doesn't mean I don't know where home is. It means I always miss it. It means growing up in a context where I struggle to be accepted, where I try to preserve my identity without being judged, where people continually tell me that I am a foreigner. Being a person of the diaspora for me also means feeling a profound nostalgia that always accompanies me like a shadow, making me feel incomplete, as if something essential is missing. It means living in constant fear of losing the connection with my roots, because at the end of the day, I am an immigrant or an emigrant. It means having my head and thoughts projected onto another place, asking myself 1,000 questions like, what if my father hadn't crossed those waters? It means to learn to manage distance and to wait, to be patient, and to learn to say goodbyes while holding my tears. But then there is nothing more beautiful than returning to the motherland, hearing the chaotic sounds of my city, people around speaking the language with which my mother raised me, the polyphonic songs during family dinners, the little kids playing around, the breeze of the Onion Sea, and finally, I feel at home.
To me, diaspora or belonging to diaspora means my identity always being politicalized and me constantly having to defend or explain it to other people. And this happens to me in Kosovo as well as in Belgium. Like, for example, people commenting on my Albanian identity because they don't perceive me as a traditional Albanian man because I'm queer or just because I'm from Kosovo. But also in Belgium, from when I was in high school, but especially now since I'm in university, like fellow students had always have the urge to like make remarks or like have a debate with me about refugees, about migration, about Islam, and even like about the statehood of Kosovo. So I guess in general, diaspora to me means being frustrated, if that makes sense.
So what is the idea of this project? The idea is that we're going to, and I say we because even when this podcast is facilitated and researched by myself, it is a collective endeavor. I believe a podcast of this nature would not be possible without the histories and stories, but also ongoing research that learns from these histories and drives thinking from them. And a lot of people are contributing already, and I'm very, very thankful for that. So the idea about this podcast came by speaking to a good friend of mine who will hopefully contribute to a couple of episodes in the coming months. The aim is to have a conversation about the diaspora that includes and also goes beyond remittances, contribution, schatzes, and popstar fandom, mainly to explore how diasporas live and work and how they evolve. Do they still view themselves as diasporas, for instance, after living in receiving countries for more than 30 years? Something that also goes unnoticed. This means the aim is to navigate away without ignoring their geopolitical importance from certain conceptions about the Balkan migrant groups and communities and how they're viewed, clearly without aiming to induce any hierarchies for the host country. And I say Kosovo because it's nearest to me. Because then we would have this conversation which comes up continuously, yes, but you're privileged. This space recognizes the privilege a certain upbringing in the West brings. The thinking also ponders behind the idea that beyond privileges, migrant communities, however successful, are subject to classism, racism, misogyny, and other forms of discrimination that intermingle with foreigners, using this term in a self-proclaimed manner. They are more than being a mere contingent of their countries of origin in their everyday world-making. Because viewing diaspora only as a means to an end, a lot of knowledge gets lost. Hence, these histories deserve a space, including but not limited to educated diasporas. The aim is to have a multi-level engagement, not only what it means to leave one's country behind, but also what it means to live with the notion beyond nation-state conceptualizations of identity, taking into account also that for some, still perceived as migrants or children of migrants, what we term host countries is their homes. So this platform aims to be as accessible as possible. Regarding the approach, we aim to view the space respectfully and apply an inclusive approach, viewing the thematic points from a feminist perspective. Equally of importance, the series does not claim to break a particular ice in these conversations, rather than expound on existing ones with a critical voice. In relation to Kosovo and the wider Balkans, the podcast also recognizes that beyond dominant majorities, there are also minorities from these spaces who have migrated and shaped their histories in unique ways. We want to include them in this conversation, and hopefully wider Balkan Roma diasporas especially will join us and share the work and insights in our journey. So the aim of the Diasporas Speaking podcast is to highlight histories, projects, activism, and much more to compile an oral and visual archive of Kosovo, Albanian, and also Balkan diasporas scattered around the globe. So whether you are a researcher, an activist, a student who is working on a particular project, or you want to know more about diaspora, you are going to love this show. And you're free to write and participate. It's important to me that in these conversations, everyone is included, so no one gets left out. Also, people know how diaspora has shaped our lives and how migration is multifaceted. So what are we going to cover? To reveal a bit more on my first 2 episodes, we will cover diaspora archives in the making and lived diaspora histories in Germany and elsewhere. What does it mean to preserve a digital archive? But also, what do we know about guest worker families in Germany and how personal storytelling is essential? We will also speak about how migration discourses in host countries impact our lives and much more, with the overall idea that diaspora histories deserve a space. And this is what the podcast aims to do. So I cannot wait to share how diasporas live, work and evolve. In the meantime, please like and follow Diasporas Speaking on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you like to get your podcast, and tell your friends and family and loved ones all about Diasporas Speaking. See you very soon in episode 2.